So I am Wendy Moore. I'm the founder of Eleve Talent. And so Eleve, like elevate, we elevate your talent strategy. So we talk a lot about who to hire when and how. That's the short answer. So I work a lot with high growth tech startups. I also work a lot with traditional businesses, nonprofits, really anybody in a growth stage. That looks like a lot of different things. So everything from solopreneurs hiring that first early team to we're gonna scale up the entire sales team, engineering team. So work across that. Love all of my Main Street businesses as well. So I've taught at the Connecting Entrepreneurial Communities. So I speak in a lot of the rural communities as well as what can we do in the cities. So all over the country. I guess I'm giving you my intro before my bio here. I started out in economic development. So initiatives like this are one of my favorite things to come in and talk to because I think it's all about those grassroots entrepreneurial communities. Entrepreneurial ecosystems, how do we build from the ground up? I think I met some of you at the 1 Million Cups kickoff last night. 1 Million Cups is one of my favorite things. I've been to chapters all around the country as I've moved around the country. So I love that kind of entrepreneurial spirit that kind of chases you anywhere you are. I don't think entrepreneurship is geographically tied. I have also had the opportunity to just work all around the world with a lot of very interesting, innovative spaces. So I'm sharing this because we can take this a lot of different ways today. I like to start with kind of hiring fundamentals. So what I do now, after a long history of serving as a resource to entrepreneurs, and then I went in corporate tech as well. So I did change management consulting in corporate tech. So how do we navigate through change and uncertainty at scale? And what I do now is helping the teams decide, as I'm making my next hire, what's the most critical next hire, most critical next step? What does that person look like? How do we find them? And how do we set them up for success? And that is a very tricky puzzle. It's very case by case. So it really is much more of a conversation. So before we get too deep here, I've been wandering a little bit, so I've been meeting some of you. I like to have a feel for who's in the room. So if you're a resource to entrepreneurs, like SBDC, teacher, anything like that? Okay, got some? Okay, awesome, maybe. Idea stage, so you've got a dream, but you haven't launched it yet. Who's that? Awesome. Love my dreamers. So this is a good place to start. This is a good foundation to start with. How about you have a couple, or you've already launched, but you're a solopreneur? Yeah, love it. Okay, we'll talk a lot about that. That's a whole different life. You have to wear a lot of different hats, and sometimes we call those different department heads. I used to make up like a virtual assistant before I had one, and I just named her and that was my assistant. It was me. I was answering the emails, but sometimes it's nice to play a little bit bigger on your team behind the scenes so you know when you fill in that role later. And then who's 5+ employees? No, we've got a couple in here. Awesome. Anyone larger than 25, not counting the seasons, I know.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I would be in a different group, acquisition, entrepreneurship,
Okay.
that side of things.
Okay, that's an interesting category. So yeah, I like that. So acquisition entrepreneurship, which is a little bit different ballgame. So we're going to talk today, like I said, about kind of hiring fundamentals. So how to think about hiring. So this is more about your methodology. Early on, I learned creating a budget. It's more of an art than a science. You're doing a lot of predictive forecasting, making a lot of assumptions. But really, at the end of it, I'm a big fan of Peter Drucker. We all learned his management theories back in the day, father of management. But the best way to predict your future is to create it with a team that shares your vision. And so you can have a great vision, you can have a great idea. I believe that a lot of that comes down to building the team around that idea and enabling that to be successful. And so who to hire when? So it's all about the right hire at the right time. The timing is just as important as the right hire. I see this a lot. Sales is a good example. Hiring your first salesperson too early, where you don't have good product market fit. As the founder, you know in your head exactly what you're selling, exactly what your customer wants, you think you do. But then you put a salesperson in there and they're not enabled for success because you haven't proven out that process yet. So the timing matters a lot. That could be an amazing hire, but they're not set up for success because they came in too early, or they come in too late and we've already missed some traction and we've got a pipeline full of cold leads. So I see that a lot in that space, a lot in the operational hiring space. And so one of my big theories is don't hire till it hurts. So Zapier is one of I'm from Colombia, so I like to spend a lot of time over here in KC, but I live in Colombia, and Zapier is one of our unicorn success stories in Colombia. They really set the stage for what it is like to build a global distributed team. So they're headquartered out of Colombia, but they're all over the world. Incredible tech company, they're a great success story. They bootstrapped it. So they took a tiny bit of VC money at the beginning, but everything else was pure revenue, and they grew so fast. And this is what their co-founder says: do not hire till it hurts. And we were talking about this earlier because it's so easy to hire and then you regret that. You've put some overhead on, you aren't getting quite the clients that you think you are. Now you have this salary or this person dependent on you for their salary, and the money's just not coming in the same way. That is a much more painful scenario to go through than, as a founder, kind of taking on a lot of that capacity early. We all know what that looks like. However, when you do need to hire, you need to do it well. And so there is a point where, once you know that you need to hire, you know you've hit capacity, you know that you're seeing the clients coming in, right? It's how do we find those key roles? Which one is the most important one? How do we even decide that? Now, this is really case by case. So I'm not here to give you like an exact model, because food industry is going to look different than a consulting service, which is going to look different than a tech services company. But each one of them, we're going to talk about just how to think through this. So if you're laying out kind of what you think you need on your next hire, say I'm a founder that really, really hates doing the financials, right? I just do not like invoicing. I do not like accounts payable. I don't like spending my time there, right? I can do it. So there's a question of, is this a true need where I truly need somebody to take this off my plate? Or is this just something I don't like to do, right? And so one of the things I always recommend thinking through is, as you're looking at the next person, right? Everybody has to wear multiple hats. We joke about that in startups. A good generalist can go a long way as one of your early hires. However, a generalist that doesn't actually fit your need isn't going to be that helpful to you. They might be really enthusiastic, they might be really energetic, they might be willing to take on a lot of things. But it is really important to hire for expertise where it matters most. So in that financial situation, one of my favorite things to outsource at the beginning is true bookkeeping and tax support, right? It's something you can outsource. You can get a nice, bookkeeping firm. Sorry, it's very tiny, by the way. But essentially, growth phases require team members to wear multiple hats and adapt as quickly as the business evolves. Every person on your team needs to be adaptable and resourceful. That's where we find these really great early stage generalists who can wear all the hats, who can do all the things. I was this person. So I came on as employee 4 for a high growth startup. I started out as a very generic salesperson. That was what they thought they needed at the time. So that was the role I stepped into. Ultimately, I became COO of that same organization. And in that, I was overseeing marketing, sales, data privacy, human resources, operations, financials, right? You name it. That was a nice bucket, right, of generalists. So I like to say I'm a super generalist. I'm a big fan of the generalist who can jump in and do a lot of resourceful, scrappy things. But if you need expertise, like you need a developer who knows that language, that code, that exact tech stack, you need to hire for that. You can't train that on the job. You don't have time. If you need somebody who truly knows financials or can learn it, they've got a good foundation, they can learn your specific, you need to hire for that. So it's paying attention to the expertise that's absolutely necessary versus where you can be adaptable and resourceful and go on the job. Now, I think every small business employee needs to fit that adaptable, resourceful bucket. But that can look like different things. Again, jump in and ask questions if anybody has any. I always say prioritize revenue generating roles. Now, this can be a couple different types. Again, font is super tiny here, but So revenue generating or capacity generating. I'm gonna explain what I mean by this. So we had a lot of solopreneurs in here. So your time is incredibly valuable as the founder of the company. And you are your first salesperson. If you're going after investment, you're raising investment. And then you're also making decisions as the CEO of the company. So if you are adding somebody who frees you up to then go out and make more sales, or who frees you up to go out and get more investment, that is just as valuable as adding a traditional salesperson. So it's paying attention to where is that capacity, where is my time being spent? What's easy to offload off of my plate that gives me back that much more time, energy, focus to be able to go out and make more sales, to be able to go out and get more investment. Now, I didn't ask, is anybody looking for VC money, investment, funding? Awesome. Okay. I work with a lot of more high growth tech startups like that. So the investment track is one. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of energy, and it takes your focus away from the core of the business in a necessary way, but it is slightly distracting, I would say, from the core business. So tomorrow I'm leading a session that's all about like the nitty-gritty of the hiring, recruiting process, how to attract and how to retain your people. So we go into more detail on compensation then. But on a high level, you can consider not just cash, but also equity or some other type of benefit to go into how you're getting these people on board. So typically when you're hiring early, right, the cash is coming in, but maybe it ebbs and flows, or your cash is coming in, but there's not a lot of it, or you're venture-backed, so you're waiting on funding, whatever that looks like. If you're cash like tight, which most startups are, but need to hire, consider creative ways to supplement that cash, right, for compensation for employees. Now, this looks different for different employees. So I have a client right now where she has 6 employees on right now, and every single one of them has a different mix of cash and equity in the company. Some of them are working for 0 cash and much higher amount of equity. Sometimes that happens. Now, when I say equity, that could look like ownership shares. That could look like profit sharing. So if you're more traditional business and you're not working like a venture-backed startup, there are other ways to give incentives. Sales commission is a good example of that, but that can, track across roles outside of sales. So they get to see results for performance. They get to be project-based. You can, do a little bit more part-time hourly. You can get creative in kind of what goes into this. So it doesn't have to look like a W-2 salaried employee, is where I'm going with this. If it's more of a consultancy model, maybe they're paid according to the clients they work. So it's not everything that the business is working on, but if they're on this client, they get that percentage. So there's a couple different creative ways to get to payment, and each employee is going to be motivated by different things. So in that client I mentioned, right, 6 employees, 1 takes 0 cash, all equity, 1 takes very low cash, a little bit higher equity, and you see this ratio, right, and then 1 is getting all cash, no equity, but they're getting paid pretty much market rate for what their job is. So when we in recruiting or in HR, we talk about market rate, is what should you be paid if you were to go into private industry, have nice benefits, have nice, 401k, all the things that entrepreneurship doesn't always offer at the early stages. But you can get closer to that true market salary. I'm going to stop there because that typically sparks some questions. Any questions or any clarifications? Yeah.
So what is, if a C Corp owns an LLC, like an LLC is looking to hire and give out equity essentially just for the LLC, how would you structure that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's nuanced, and you probably want a better tax legal answer, but on a high level, that LLC is still a standalone entity. So that standalone entity, they're getting equity shares in that one. And then the C Corp is more the holding company. You see that a lot. So I have a client, for example, that's more like a venture studio. So they have like the bigger one, and then they spin out different companies underneath it. Each one of those companies is a standalone entity. So the employees in that company, they're getting shares in that company, not the bigger. So your C Corp structure would be the same. And that's a model because one, it reduces a little bit of risk, gives you a little bit of distance from whatever happens in that LLC, and then you can retain. Now, typically your profit from the LLC is kind of funneling back up into the C Corp too. It gets a little, depends on how you structure it. But yes, you can absolutely do equity in just one specific entity. Now, you'd want to have a good lawyer draft your documents so that the paperwork reflects that. So the paperwork reflects that that LLC is that's the only shares, and it does not touch the C Corp. So, but yeah, not a lawyer. So there's my disclaimer. But any other questions for anyone? Has anyone done this as far as, hiring your first couple employees? Has anyone gotten creative about how you paid them? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly the way you described just now, which is to give them cash plus equity.
Yep.
And depending on their tolerance and our ability, give them more cash or more equity, or a little bit of both.
Yep. And so again, a split of cash and equity. So that's very common in more the tech startup world, especially when you're going venture backed. So it's not a bad model to carry over into other traditional industries. It's just how you split that up. Again, I'm a big fan of the profit share model as well. So as you grow and you start to see success, all your early employers are starting to get some of that profit as well. So, but you have to balance that accordingly. If you don't see profit, they don't get those same rewards. So it's very dependent on how you're doing. It helps with the seasonality and kind of ebb and flow of early business, especially in the first couple years. So.
Yes, I have a quick
Oh yeah.
So I do like video production, and I've been hiring a lot of like subcontractors,
Mm-hmm.
freelancers, to handle different parts of the pipeline.
Yeah.
Is there anything about your advice so far that you might adapt to more of a freelancer kind of approach?
That's a great question.
Okay.
So, good segue, yeah. I never know where to place this because one of the first things, but it's also, so one of the components is leverage alternative support, right? So that's contractors and freelancers, that's fractional executives, outsourcing agencies. So I'm actually considered a fractional executive in most of the clients I work with. I come in as your fractional head of people, and I work with a team way before they're ready for full time, but they know that they have a need, right? So you get a fraction of my time for a fraction of the price that it would be to have this person on full time.
Exactly right. That's why I was like,
Yeah. And it's a tricky bucket to fit into. One of the things I'll clarify about fractionals, that's one of my favorite go-tos, is, so you hear a lot about consultancies, right? So in a consultancy, you get my brain. As a fractional, you get my brain in my hands, which means we're not only setting a strategy, we're actually going to implement and do it together. So that's a little bit of a difference. We're starting to see a big surge in small business support with fractionals because there's a lot of people with great expertise, but again, you probably can't afford them full-time in your business this early. So how do you get 5 hours a week, 10 hours a week of their dedicated strategic support? You get that high-level strategy, you also get the work, and then they either help build the team internally. I always say what success looks like for me in my business is my client eventually outgrows me. I replace myself, and then maybe we stay on a little bit ad hoc after, but really we replace them and they grow internally at that point. So that's a really big growing industry, every single focus area you can imagine. So we're seeing this in product. We've seen this a long time in CFOs. So fractional CFOs have been around for a long time. That's a great way to get high-level financial strategic advice without having them full-time in your business. Legal support has also been doing this for a long time. So you're seeing it in those kind of specialties. Now you're seeing it across operations, across product, people. So every other area, compliance, I'm seeing some cybersecurity out there. So this is a great thing to plug into. And typically, if you're like myself, you have startup rates and small business rates because we understand more than most how hard it is to scale up from that. So that's a really great way to do it. Contractors and freelancers, I'm a big fan of. We talked earlier, right? Restaurant seasonality, food seasonality, anything that has like an ebb and flow, yes. Leverage those part-time seasonal workers, contractors, freelancers. There's so many talented people out there on Upwork now and all of these different freelance platforms. So it's a great way to get a single project done without having them on your payroll long term. Yeah.
Yes, a lot of what I've done is, because I own an HR consultancy,
Mhm.
and I do fractional support. I
Yeah.
do everything minus benefits and payroll, because I
Mhm.
outsource those. I have a healthy respect, and honestly,
Yes.
I don't want to do it.
Same.
It's not my calling.
Same.
But what I found is that I don't tend to do freelancers. I've met other entrepreneurs or know other entrepreneurs that fill in the gaps for the places that I don't want to do.
Yeah.
And so when a client comes to me, I'm able to offer the full service, and they just contract through me.
Yes.
So it's not like a random person I don't know. It's a
Mhm.
relationship I've built with another entrepreneur that can then provide that service, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So then you guys are leading business to each other instead of just random. I mean, not that it ran.
No, for sure.
But
Yeah.
it's a way to continue that cycle, because we all want to make money, right?
So I'll repeat that a little bit in my own words to make sure for the.
'cause I'm always super
Yeah.
weird, so
And so a great fractional HR exec here. So when we're talking about hiring somebody who's well embedded in the entrepreneur ecosystem, they can also help you find those other freelancers, contractors, specialists for those ad hoc projects as needed. I've done the same thing, right? Where you're already engaged with, this fractional executive in some way, and then they help you find somebody for that ad hoc project or that specific thing that's outside of their scope of expertise, but that you're plugged into. So having the right people on your team is this compounding effect. And that happens across the board. When we're hiring and scaling that team, they also are the people who most likely know other people in their specialty, their area of expertise, or complementary areas of expertise. So making really quality hires early is this really compounding effect, because good people know other good people. So if you are scaling up your accounting team, you hire a really great first accounting manager. They probably went to school with a couple other good accountants, and then as you grow, they can help you hire and attract those people. So it's this really nice, again, making strategic hires early. I cannot overplay how important that is. Also, a bad hire is going to bring you down. The same way a good hire elevates your team, a bad hire can sink it. So I said, don't hire till it hurts. There's a saying that, sleep on it before you make a hire, but fire quickly if you need to. I probably hit somewhere in the middle. I like to give people a chance to redeem themselves, but if you know, you know. So if you do need to offboard an employee that's not adding value to your team, doing that sooner rather than later just helps your team across the board, because the overall organization will be impacted by a negative person on the team every time. So trying to get that removed as quickly as possible. That would come into play really quickly in the acquisition world. That's a big analysis you have to do early on, so is who to keep on. Yeah.
Question to you, if you're exploring outsourcing, say for bookkeeping, is there a typical premium you're paying on top of that for budgeting purposes that's helpful, or is it's going to vary market to market?
There's so much variation, so I'll repeat that. So is there a typical kind of payment for outsourcing?
Premium, I guess.
Yeah, premium.
Yeah.
I would say probably not. From my experience, outsourcing doesn't have as much of a premium as you think versus having somebody full-time on your payroll, mostly because it's such a fast-growing industry. They have to be competitive, so they tend to have to price competitively. So I'm not seeing as much. It used to be. So you used to pay quite a bit more. One of the benefits, so let's use bookkeeping as an example. So bookkeeping is one of the first things that you typically outsource. It's a specialized thing. You don't need that person full-time on your team. They can handle it for that seasonality. The great thing about that is that you have some consistency. So if you're using a bookkeeping agency, you might have 5 people there, and if your one person leaves, there's 4 other people who could pick up the slack. So you get some consistency. That's my number one reason for outsourcing something like that, is that when they have the backup. Because if your accountant leaves, that's a really rough transition, because you're scrambling for a while, you get behind a month or 2 while you're staffing that up. The premium involved in that, I haven't seen quite as much, because you're not paying benefits, you're not paying all of the other kind of ancillary costs you'd have with an employee. So it typically still comes in less because their hours are less. That's not always true if you're paying a really expensive bookkeeper, possibly, but hopefully you're also getting more strategic support from them. So I often go to, like, I have an outsourced CFO agency I refer to. They do bookkeeping, but they also have kind of a CFO level strategic mindset with it. You don't typically get that level of strategy out of a typical like bookkeeping agency. So it's worth paying for. So it just depends on what you need. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yeah.
Probably gonna get to this, so if I'm.
Oh, you're fine. What's my next slide? Yeah.
Well, specifically with the fractional execs, where do you go to sort of find that type of person?
That's a great question. I mean, well, I'm laughing because like we have communities within our own like fractional communities.
Yeah.
Typically ask somebody who knows somebody. There's a lot of networking involved. There are a couple sites now that are like find a fractional or like fractional exec jobs where you could post something out. But typically I would try to find somebody who does that, even if it's not in the specialty you're looking for, and see who else they know. Because we all know each other, but as far as like having a hub to hire, there's not, some of them are on Upwork, so that's the thing. So some of them are on some of these freelancer platforms and they'll quantify themselves as I'm a fractional CTO or I'm a fractional COO. So some of them are starting to do that. Google, some are better at marketing than others. I will say I do next to zero marketing. Most of my clients are referral based because I have good clients, so then they know good clients. So a lot of it's pretty insular. Do you want to add to that?
I was just going to say,
Yeah.
I know some chambers have resource partners.
Mhm.
I'm the HR resource partner
That's
for
great.
the Heartland Black Chamber. So, and it's not just for their members. I mean, obviously their members see us the most, but like, so I don't know about the other chambers. Well, I know we work also with the Hispanic chamber. So like, those clients see our faces on a regular basis.
Mhm.
So while there's not all facets covered, it goes back to, you can at least find someone who works in that space who probably knows someone that works in the space that you're going for. But I mean, I would say HR people, we're kind of like, right? We're probably hidden in plain sight.
We're people by nature, so yeah, networking is part of the gig. But so to repeat, chambers are a good resource, can be. I volunteer with like 4 different entrepreneurial resources kind of things. So Founders Institute, economic development organizations in a couple different hubs, chambers. And so if you keep an eye on some of those resource hubs, that is a great. If you're in tech, accelerators often use fractional executives. And so like I mentor through like Techstars, for example. So there's a couple different like hubs you can find them. LinkedIn, you just search for what you need, you'll probably come up with quite a few. You can also hit me up after this and I can help you, so as a final. And then agencies, there's an agency for everything at this point. This is where a lot of marketing comes up. And so just leverage the tools that are out there that give you the bigger team without getting you more payroll. That's the summary of this particular section. So whatever you can leverage, even if it's more expensive short term, is okay because you're still not committing to that reoccurring payroll. So you can ebb and flow, you can use it as needed, use ad hoc support versus having somebody sitting expecting a check from you every 2 weeks, no matter how good your business is doing. So I'm a big fan of leveraging this as long as you can and staying as lean as you can. So.
This is purely a shameless plug, but we are fractional marketing for
Awesome.
Exactly what you're saying. The reason we moved to that is just because we knew we wanted to work with small businesses. They struggle knowing what to ask for, so that when we go to agencies and contractors, freelancers, they tend to be order takers. But usually you're asking for your 4th priority, thinking it's your 1st priority. But you're fractional, the strategic support, that's even when we hire, we go for those who position themselves as fractional.
Yeah.
Just because they imply like leadership, and they're willing to tell you may be thinking differently or you need something different than you're asking for.
I love that.
Yeah, shameless plug.
I love to see that. It's growing a lot more in marketing as well, because it used to be more of a true agency model, and having that true fractional embedded helps a lot with the strategy. So that's really great. Thank you. Yeah.
I was also going to say I'm also fractional sustainability.
Look at all the fractionals in their room today. See, this is where you find them. You just show up. Yeah.
But the KC Business Journal at some point during this year did a list of all the different fractional agencies, so you might want to check out the business journal and it had a lot of different organizations.
Awesome. So KC Business Journal, check it out for fractional talent. Yeah.
And a tip for the business journal, since it's paywall, you can get it through your library account.
Ooh, that is a good tip. Get on Libby, yeah.
And then you can access the KC Business Journal through that.
I love that. Awesome. Awesome. So, okay. We're doing great on time too. So obviously plan for growth feels a little redundant. Obviously all of this is planning for growth. But as we look at how we're setting up all of these key hires, right? I think a lot about agile alignment, right? You've got to align with your true vision. You know what you're trying to achieve, but keep it agile, keep it fresh, keep it moving, because each person on your team has to be that adaptable, resourceful person. They're going to have to be willing to take on things outside of a typical scope. So we're looking at really long-term fit. So you know what you need the next 6 months, and that's typically what I see people hire for. That's what you make the job description for. You know your pain points. You know when you need capacity, right? But always keeping in mind, yes, we're addressing this short-term need, but is this person going to be a long-term fit? Are they going to be able to grow with the company over time? Do they have leadership potential? Now, this isn't a prerequisite for every hire. Not everybody can be a leader in the company. So just keeping an eye on, do they want to lead and grow a team, or do you see that spark in them? Do you see that people management spark, which is its own skill? Or are they a really strong individual contributor? I see this really often in engineering. So in software engineering, not everybody needs to be an engineering manager, right? You can have amazing principal software developers who know their stuff. They are a leader in the team, but they are not managing people because that is not their skill set. They are the best when they're hands on keyboard doing the thing. And so this is a really critical thing on every single role in the organization. Not everybody has to be manager potential, but you do need to keep an eye on those who are and enable them for success. So keeping an eye on leadership. Leadership can look like different things. It doesn't have to be a people manager. But how does that potential show up as you're growing? And reward the people who are showing up as A players. We're going to talk more about retention tomorrow. So keeping those A players, so attracting them and keeping them. But when you're making every single decision on who to hire, just keep an eye on all of this. And then your existing team dynamics. So I did a stint in change management, and I learned so much about how each little piece of the puzzle is going to ripple across the entire team, the organizational dynamics. Every time you make a hire, there is a huge influx of new energy. Sometimes that's positive, sometimes that's not. And so just keeping an eye on all of those changing dynamics as you evolve and grow. When we're looking at leaders, somebody might be on your team for longer tenure, but then maybe you have to promote somebody in over them to become a people manager. These are always really tricky dynamics to navigate. I always say, again, a lot of what I work on with my clients is all the existing team. We do a lot of hiring, but we also have to navigate all of the little nitty-gritty people dynamics and give the team a safe space to have an outlet to talk about it. And that is often not the founder, because you're the one making those decisions. So unfortunately, you can't be everybody's friend on the team. Hopefully they all enjoy you as a leader, but giving them an outlet to be able to talk about what they're feeling, all of the different dynamics happening, if they have a problem with you as the founder, all of those different things, making sure you set up a structure for them to be able to communicate about any type of dynamic that they have. I'm a big fan of celebrating the wins as you go, so creating that culture of everyone on the team celebrates the successes of everyone on the team. You're creating some trust, you're creating collaboration, all of that warm, fuzzy stuff we want to see on a team. But this is something to really keep an eye on as you make every hire, especially when you're going from 1 to 2, 2 to 4. Like each one of those, you're changing so much about those dynamics. So, any questions about that? Yeah. No, you're good.
One issue related to team dynamics that I have right now is that everybody that's working with me, everybody's remote. And so there's kind of this culture of non-communication. Like everybody's sending kind of the minimal messages that they can to get the point across. And I'm like, we need some of that water cooler talk just to build rapport and build the relationships so that then we can kind of push and pull on each other a little more.
Yeah.
Any commentary on that?
Yes. Do you use any, like what tools do you use? Do you use Slack, email? What are you using right now?
Mostly like messaging. I mean, a lot of it's honestly Facebook Messenger.
Okay.
Some Telegram, depending on where they are.
Yeah. Okay.
Stuff like that.
So the reason I asked, so asking about like,
I don't have a central
yeah.
I don't have a Slack channel, and that's it.
So that helps. So when you're working with a distributed team, and I'll use that because sometimes you have like a mix, right? Sometimes fully remote, sometimes some are on site, some are remote. Setting up your communication channels and telling people how to use them is like the most fundamental piece, I think, of creating some consistency. So I'm a big fan of Slack for what it's meant to be, which is a communication. It started out more of a developer tool, but what it's turned into is it's a communication channel where everybody can just message. It's centralized. Everyone can see everything else that's messaging. And it's as close as you can get to creating a nice hub of conversation that you would maybe otherwise get around a water cooler in the office, over here, your cube, the guy in the cube next to you, or whatever it may be. And so when you're using something like that, you can create some cadences where everybody's checking in at the same time. So I like to borrow from tech startups a lot because they know how to build fast and they know how to build remotely. So some of the principles that I pull is like a daily stand-up. So you use that a lot in development. It's great for every business, is a quick daily stand-up. If you don't want to do it daily, at least do it weekly. So I'm a big fan of an all-hands weekly team meeting when you're small enough to keep that all hands. I like to do it on Mondays. Some people hate that. I like to set the week off, like let's project what we're gonna do. I've worked with teams that do it on Friday and they talk about what they did do and then what they're gonna do next. Whatever works for you and your team, but have something weekly where everybody gets their faces on the same video at the same time. Make sure it works for your team. Time zones can get a little funky, but try to make it consistent, happens every time. Expectation is that you're there. And it creates that camaraderie. If your daily stand-up can't be live, do it over Slack. Have everybody put like use a template. Set your intention for the day, talk about what you're gonna do today, talk about any challenges you have. Every single day. That's the message I expect from every person on my team. That's a great way to, one, see who's like active, what they're working on. If they have challenges, you get ahead of it, right? If you follow EOS, right, it's like, what are my rocks? Like, what are the big initiatives I'm tackling? And then what are the obstacles I have to those big initiatives? If there's no obstacles, you say none, right? But it's a really good way to just consistently check in. The other trick I would say, so I used to do like a remote workforce initiative for like this big global company, right? So we had people in all over the world, different time zones, all the things. So one of the things we did is we had a map of communication channels and what they were used for. So what is the urgency? If I send you an email, I'm expecting an answer in 24 hours. I do not expect an answer quickly. An email is within 24 hours. That was the expectation we set. You set your own. If I send you a Slack message, I would like an answer within the next hour. So hopefully faster than that, but that's within the next hour. If I call you, I want it now. So that was the expectation we set. You can set what makes sense for your organization, but as long as you set those priorities and the expectations within your team for what makes sense for your team, everybody knows if I get a Slack message, I should respond to that in an hour. Or if it's urgent, you mark accordingly. It's turning off that kind of always on expectation, because that's not as healthy as we maybe set it up to be. But it does set the expectation for what we expect everybody to do. So, yeah.
Piggyback off that.
Yeah.
To that same point, but more on the less what I would call productive side. I see success in groups that I'm a part of with regular kind of fun or more life-related check-ins. So I'm in a group and we have a Friday celebration.
Love it.
Every Friday morning at 10, it's tell us what you're celebrating. It can be work-related or it can be personal-related, whatever it wants to be. In the same group, we have a intention for the week, and our director kind of pulls 3 items, and we pick which one relates the most with our intention. So if you're looking at some of that community camaraderie that's really hard to build in freelance teams, right? Because you're everywhere else. I would also in those same communication channels, right? So don't pick another one, but in that same one, you have your stand-up for the productive stuff, and then you have a funny meme Monday.
Yep.
Right?
100%.
Post a funny meme, and those are optional, but it creates this, like, I know every Friday I'm going to have a group of people that are ready to hear about my celebration for the week, and that like does build that community. So you can use those same tools to build some like non-work stuff, which helps with that like community camaraderie feel.
Yep.
And kind of
Thank you for sharing that. I love that. I'm such a huge fan of celebrating the wins and the human side. So
Yeah, I was gonna say kind of along with that. So before I became entrepreneur, my last job was at GEWKC. So none of my team worked with me. They all worked in Mexico or Canada. So I was managing a remote team that I met twice. It's fine. But we celebrated birthdays, any major accomplishments, like kind of along what she said about the Friday. It wasn't always on Friday, but like there was 25 people on our team collectively with multiple supervisors. So if someone had a birthday, we're getting at least 20 shout outs depending on who was on PTO that day, right? So it's without being too personal, you can celebrate things that are not super, even with the most introverted, super personal things. Like me and my kid went to a debutante ball, so I put a photo of us dressed up, and everybody was like, "Oh my gosh, she's so cute." I was like, "What about me?" But anyway, I look great dressed up. It's fine. I understand I don't exist. I'm somebody's mom, but more importantly, it allows you to celebrate some personal things without. Some people are very, very, very private, so it allows them to participate as much as they want to, without it strictly being business.
I agree. And that's the benefit of like a Slack or something like that, is you can have different channels for different functions, right? So you can get down to nitty-gritty project work in one channel, and then you can have the random channel or the celebrations or whatever, and you can create some different vibes in each one. You can use it for productivity and for communication and culture. I get really nitty-gritty into this tomorrow on like culture and community, because again, those are the things that keep employees. They don't come for the or they might come for the compensation, but they don't stay for it, right? They stay for the culture, they stay for the community, they stay for the meaning and value. So that's a lot of what we dig into in the session tomorrow, but loving all this good vibes. Yeah.
Yeah, one other idea we follow is bring your work to your pet day.
Yeah.
So we actually bring the pet.
Bring the pet.
Dog, cat,
Yep.
I don't know what the kid is
Yep.
doing and not letting me be part of it. And so we take our work to the pet day, and we invite our pets to come over and share.
I love that. I've been on those Zoom calls and they're chaos, but it's really fun, right? Everyone brings their pet to the, bring the work to the pet. That's fun. So, that's awesome. All right, we're gonna keep pushing through. So I wanted to share one of my clients, just a little bit more of a deep dive into one of these. Hopefully it's a relevant one. We have a lot of variety here for different types of businesses. But one of the clients I work with, right, we talked a lot about focusing on those first hires are revenue generating, or all of the different things to think through. So this is a data consultancy company. So they've got a couple sides of their business. One is really consultant oriented, so it's very human time centric. A person has to be in seat working with a client. And then they also have a technology component that helps them scale. So it's a little bit of a two-sided, there's a great benefit to that as you scale. Technology can serve one of the things we didn't talk about is technology can serve a great replacement for human bodies and seats to an extent at some point. We're seeing people leverage AI tools to scale their team in a more lean way. That's been the case for that's why HR technology exists, that's why finance technology exists. QuickBooks can help me as a founder muddle my way through my own finances for a while until I scale up. So all of this technology has been around. So in this data consultancy, they've been in business for 7 years, and the only people on the team were the one founder and 8 engineers behind the scenes. This was an interesting model because they were delivering the services to the client, but that one founder's time was across every client, all the consultancy, all of the sales. Okay, they weren't investment backed, but if they were trying to go for investment, it would have to be that too. Very profitable business, but at some point you start to hit a really interesting inflection where you've got engineers that can crank out products and create the solution that clients are asking for, but the founder's time, super stretched. So it's a very interesting model to jump into and talk about, okay, who's your next hire? So the first 2 hires, and we had to do it simultaneously, was how do we immediately add capacity for our client facing, because we have more clients now who needs support. So we have existing clients, the engineers have done great work, but now we need somebody to maintain our existing clients. That's not the founder, because he's out there selling, he's out there doing new consultancy. So how do we maintain our existing to retain those clients? And then how do we get more sales to then create the cycle again? So we did a sales hire and a professional services kind of consultant hire simultaneously. It added two quick capacity, immediate capacity. So that was a fun problem to solve, because typically we run into technical is where you need more help, but they had that problem solved. Now that was a very successful business because they were putting out the product that their clients wanted, rinse, repeat. They had repeat customers, they had all of this great retention, but at some point you start to tip over the edge of not being able to retain those clients. So this model is true across if you're providing services, it's true if you're providing technology services or time-based professional services. And it's an interesting kind of scale-up issue. So we can go into more detail on that if it makes sense, but no, we're kind of hitting time. So that is it for the official presentation. Does anyone want to dig into anything else? We got like 10 minutes to go.
I was gonna say, I've learned that you can't hire somebody exactly like you. You can't hire a 5 and expect yourself to not, they'll work themselves out of the job.
Yep.
Because they'll be ahead of you.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know.
One of my favorite quotes is they're like, if you're short, don't hire another short person. If you're tall, don't hire another tall person.
You need somebody like you. You need somebody even
Yes.
diversity.
I mean, you want to like
Yep.
personality, everything.
Yeah.
Hire a 2.
And this is I'm glad you brought this up.
Is there a personality
They're going to
thing
quit
you're doing?
and go somewhere else.
Yeah, so culture fit is one of the bigger buzzwords in hiring.
What is it called?
Culture fit. I mean, everyone talks about you want people to fit into your current team's culture. I think that there's a balance. I'm a big fan of having, let's talk through this, I guess, on a really high level very quickly. For example, don't hire other short people for short, don't hire other tall people for tall, right? You need a balance on your team. You need people who are strong in what you're not strong in. And you also need people who fit in with like we're talking about this team dynamics. So from a values perspective, you need people who align with your values, they get your mission. And so when I talk culture fit, that's what I'm focused on. They align with your values of what you're driving your business on. They align with the mission, they get it, they want to live and breathe this for the next couple years as long as they're with you, and they are committed. What I don't talk about in culture fit is they look exactly like you, sound exactly like you, and you can have a beer with them. I'm not looking for a happy hour team. We're looking for a productive team that can add a lot of value with a lot of diverse perspectives. And I think there's typically a bit of a balance there because a lot of people hire for the happy hour. And then they're surprised that they don't have the skill set or that you don't have diverse perspectives on your team. And data reflects that the most diverse teams are also the most productive. They scale better because they're bringing all of this different experience, perspectives, and background to it. And so I'm glad you brought this up at the end because it's one of the more interesting kind of ebbs and flows you have to decide on when you're hiring. So if I were to give like a quick tips for how do you evaluate people in the interview process, I'm a big fan of very experiential, like behavioral types of questions. You want to ask what they have done, because what they have done talks a lot about what they're going to do for you. If people have never showed up that way at work before, they're not going to show up for you. And so you ask behavioral questions about like, how have you navigated through a tricky situation, and talk to me about how you handled it. And then I like to build on that and say, how would you handle it differently now? Because you hear about what they did do and their skills and their expertise, but then you also hear about how they grew and how have they grown since they did that thing. So I'm always looking for growth-minded people who are skilled at what you need them to be skilled at. And you can evaluate a lot from a culture fit, values alignment perspective as people talk to you about those things. If somebody's venting about how terrible their last team was and how their manager never got them and how they were underutilized in their last role, it's probably not the A player you're looking for because they didn't show up in the way that you need them to show up in your company. If there's somebody who points at an excuse versus finding a solution, you're going to find that out in these types of questions. So if you're trying to suss out like, how does this person align with what we really care about? One, figure out what you care about before you get in that interview. And then two, try to get to the bottom of how is that person going to show up on my team. If you already have another person on your team that reflects these great values, look at how they're showing up and then ask questions along those same lines. Yeah, that's a quick high-level summary. Yeah.
When you're working with entrepreneurial teams, since we're smaller, do you think it's worth having like a 360 with your current employees if you're bringing someone in?
Yeah.
For the right fit?
So in the interview process, like a team interview?
Process, you think it's valuable or?
So my go-to for interview like structure is trying to keep it as few interviews as possible, right? So I never break 4, right? I try to do 3, but never break 4. And in that process, the hiring manager should be one of the most important. So the person that they report to and work with, and absolutely. And then second is who are they going to work with on their team or cross departments. And that's a good team. Now, I would never want to throw like 5 or 6 people on a team in an interview with somebody. But if you can pick 3, 2 to 3, and those people are who they work with day in, day out. And if you're small enough, maybe these are fractionals, right? It doesn't have to be W-2 employees. So I have one where they outsourced one of their outsourced CFOs. It was an accounting manager role. So their outsourced CFO was one of the interview because it's a partner. So even though they aren't officially on the team. And so absolutely have key team members meet them. But I always like to set the expectation for those team members that their contribution and assessment is really valid and we want to hear what they think about it. And the success of that new hire doesn't land on them. I think those are the 2 things to clarify. I've had some newer managers in an interview and they're nervous to give a full thumbs up to somebody because they're not sure. They're not 100% sure that they want to endorse this new hire because they think, well, maybe there's concerns. So I always just set the expectation, what are we measuring them on? So having some really good values and skills that we've clarified we're measuring them on. And then making it clear to those other team members, we want your input, but at the end of the day as the founder, this decision's on me. Does that make sense? So I try to be really inclusive in the interview process, but I also try not to put the weight of that. I've seen certain team members get really nervous being in an interview. So sometimes you need a little bit of coaching, a little bit of, it's okay, their success or failure does not land on you as an interview panelist. So, yeah.
Question on if you're starting to build a freelancer team and the person you're wanting to bring in will do different levels of skill-based work. So getting back to that generalist, if some of the work they'll do is market rate lower, but some of them are market rate higher, do you recommend just picking a good in the middle hourly to bring them on? Do you recommend a retainer model? How do you kind of recommend where some of their work may be lower value, but some of their work is higher value and you want to have them do both?
So the same person doing some high value work and low value work as a freelancer? Okay. That's
the right word.
right. No, I get what you're saying though. I mean, some of it is, again, would be charged at a lower hourly rate.
Right.
I might answer this differently, right? If I'm the person doing the work, I go toward retainer-based, project-based outcomes, right? It gives a known entity for you as a founder. You know what you're going to pay them. And then it could vary between this variety of types of work, but it's a monthly retainer type of model. As the founder, though, that might not be the cheapest way to go, but it helps you with some of that ebb and flow. If the freelancer is open to counting their hours and when I'm doing this work, it's this rate, and when I'm doing this work, it's this rate, that weight would be on them, on tracking the hours, on reporting which work was done where. So, but I would put that on the freelancer, that weight and that timekeeping, and then you can audit and approve it. The easy way is the retainer, but it also might be more expensive. But if you are really clear on what you're expecting those outcomes to be, what types of projects and what types of outcomes and all of that, I don't know. So I'm not really answering your question because it depends, I guess, but both are valid models. I guess it's who's tracking the time and the payment and the billing, and is that time worth it to you? Or is the consistency more important to you? So, yeah. As the freelancer, like the fractional, I always bill monthly retainer because my work is a really wide variety of like consultancy, recruiting, and actual like projects, hands-on projects. So if I'm the person doing the work, I want a retainer, but so, yeah.
Do you have any milestones you would look for in terms of when to kind of graduate from like freelancers, contractors to part-time employees?
You guys like to ask the really like, it depends, you know? So your milestones are gonna be very profit driven, right? So how is your profit like coming out, and at what point is it consistent enough? And so again, that depends. It's very cash flow related, but I always like to bank a good amount of cash flow runway so that when you have down months, you're not having to lay off any team members. So getting to that comfortable point, not hiring on a bunch of them at one time. They're starting to look, so I got 2 minutes left. So, but once your profit margin gets high enough that you feel comfortable enough with the difference, again, it might not be as much of a cost difference as you think between freelancer and W-2 full-time, but all of the ancillary fees are what are going to get you and the management side of that. So, but once you get to that comfortable point and you're using the same people every time and you know that they're really good team members and you want to make sure that they're consistent and locked in, it's absolutely worth it from a consistency standpoint. So I can't answer that for you necessarily, but you'll start to get a feel for it, I think, as a founder once you've passed a few cycles as well. So I always like to say, like, first 2 years are the hardest, right? It's like you go through a couple different types of seasons. There's different types of client responses. Your market looks different. So, but you're going to start to see those trends, and you're going to be able to see, like, I'm always steady enough to have 3 full-time people, and then we can ebb and flow and supplement the rest. Like, you'll start to see those milestones, but we could dig into that more offline, like for you specifically. So, but yeah.
I was just going to say, when you go from contractor to employee, know that there are compliance standards. So as an HR fractional person, I spend a lot of time building HR handbooks, employee handbooks, because there are rights and legalities that have to happen when you have employees that don't necessarily have to be in place when you have contractors.
Yeah.
So build in that cost, because that's like, if you don't do anything else, please have an employee handbook.
Yeah.
Like, please.
100%.
My public service announcement.
Yes.
Today.
Have an employee handbook.
And,
Yes.
and with that, a lot of HR fractional folks, it's all the policies, right? It's not just your handbooks. Like, I also write SOP manuals because people tend to think documentation doesn't fall within HR, and oftentimes it does.
Yeah.
So just know there are extra costs outside of hiring, like moving those people to full time, that you have to think about from an HR perspective.
I will say on the flip side as well, so yes, full-time employees have their own set of like policy and compliance. Using contractors is also getting trickier. So all of the legality around who can qualify as a 1099 contractor has changed a lot. And how long, and can they be only your contractor versus are they free to contract with other companies? All of that is really changing a lot. And so again, not a lawyer, but I will say keeping an eye on what counts as a freelancer and a contractor is getting more complicated to protect the employees from companies having classified everybody as a contractor long past when they should have. So, but I do have to wrap.
Is full-time still 40 hours?
It's like 30 something, it's 36, 35. Yeah, 35 plus is full-time. But again, there's state specific, there's even some city, like, so there's a lot of nuances there. Yeah, yeah. So thank you all. Please connect with me. I've got cards up here. Oh, I do have